to prescribe. Thank God we've got some not only great treatments in the past, but ones that are coming on board that show great promise. But if you don't combine the mental health and the social health, it's like a three-legged stool. The stool's going to fall down. And what I read into the President's executive order the other day is a commitment to start connecting the dots. All of us in our movement know that we're so fragmented. All of us as advocates advocate for one little diagnosis or one piece of the treatment continuum. We never take a holistic approach, and furthermore, we never connect all the different government agencies that touch someone with these illnesses. We relegate them to one system, and that's the healthcare system. And we've forgotten that these people work and operate within all the housing and, tragically, and too often the case in the criminal justice system and the human services system and so forth. And what we've never done as a country is think about the true cost of these illnesses across the government. We only look at the cost to the medical spend alone. And until we take a broader aperture of this, we're never going to wrap our arms around all the needs that someone has, such that we can provide them the support that's going to give them the best chance at long-term recovery. Now, in this audience, I see many friends who are there for Amy and I. Furthermore, let me acknowledge my wife, Amy Kennedy, is over here in the back. Amy and I co-founded the Kennedy Forum shortly after I left Congress, and the main goal of the Kennedy Forum was to really push for the full enforcement of the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act and to end the double standard in our healthcare system that treated the body but neglected the mind, that treated the physical but neglected the mental. It's hard to believe that that has been the case throughout our history, and frankly, we still need to fight that battle. But as you know, we at the Kennedy Forum have also taken on the Alignment for Progress. And in the Alignment for Progress, we're not only advocating for more access, meaning payers reimburse for care, but we're also advocating for outcomes. God forbid we would ever want to pay for something that actually has better outcomes. And so the idea is the alignment. We have to align the reimbursement to pay for the treatments that actually show the greatest results. Not a rocket science here, but certainly a paradigm shifter if you think about our field. Because all we do today is pay for services. Did you make your therapy? Check. Did you make your check? We don't check how people are actually doing in their lives. Are they stable? Have they been able to hold down a job? Do they have housing? Are they reconnected with their family and friends? Are they in the community? These are things that have never been done in our system, and one hope that I have through Secretary Kennedy's whole initiative is that we can start to connect all of these dots that have been left aside in the whole approach. But the Alignment for Progress today is getting new life. And it's getting new life through the Action for Progress, because we at the Kennedy Forum have put great, policies forward, and we needed to curate those policies. But at the end of the day, we need to also implement those policies. And I am so grateful that I met an old friend who I reconnected with in Tom Kasumpis and found out that he has done at his firm HealthSperian exactly what we want in mental health and addiction. He revolutionized the end-of-life care to ensure that we had a bundled payment model that pays for outcomes for the whole person. And frankly, for those of us who are advocating for addiction and mental illness treatment, we want a bundled payment model. Right. And Tom and his A-team at HealthSperian have wrapped themselves around our initiative at the Center for Behavioral Health at HealthSperian. Many of you have been partners for us in that effort, but I just can't thank Tom enough. And I'll just conclude with this. You know, many of you may wonder, what am I doing up here with someone that I share in common very little with politically? And I'll just answer that by telling you a story. In the years since I left Congress, I took up the fight against commercialized marijuana, and I fought sports betting and the problems with gambling in this country, both of which are new addiction-for-profit industries that are really compromising the health and well-being of our fellow Americans. And guess what? Fox News used to love having me on. They used to love having me on because I was like a Democrat that talked against marijuana. They said, we got to have that guy on here. So I went on all the time. But what always surprised me is when I got off Fox News, and of course I would check my phone for messages, my phone lit up. And it was all my fellows in recovery. And I'm thinking to myself, that many people in recovery are watching Fox News? So it was a real awakening for me that we really can't be divisive in this issue. We have to be unified because as much as we have our political disagreements, this is an issue that affects every single American, as the Secretary has said. And I really appreciate the fact that he has taken his role as HHS Secretary to put this on the spotlight. And so with that, I'm going to have my friend Tom Kasumpis invite the Secretary to have a fireside chat around all of these issues and the new initiatives that have just recently been announced. Thank you so much, Tom.
Well, Patrick, before we have the Secretary on, I just want to say one thing. First of all, welcome to all of you. We're all here because of your leadership. So I think we want to give Patrick an extraordinary round of applause. He has brought all of this together for us to focus on and make a difference. And now we're going to welcome the Secretary of Health and Human Services to the stage. Welcome, Secretary Kennedy.
Secretary, good to see you.
Good to see you. Well, thank you so much for being with us at our launch for Action for Progress. This is such an important issue. As you and I have talked, and you've said so many times, mental health, behavioral health, addiction is really one of the most critically important issues in our healthcare today. And it affects families throughout the country, all parts of families, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers. It really is so extraordinarily important. And I know how important it is to you, and so we're so grateful for you to spend the time with us today, but also I think to hear from you about why it's important and sort of where we're going with the exciting new announcements that you made just recently around the executive order and the focus that you're taking to address these issues. Talk to us about that.
I mean, it's a raw financial issue. It can be reduced to a raw financial issue. It costs about $92 billion a year in direct costs, about $890 billion a year in indirect costs and lost productivity and cost to our healthcare system, and just collateral damage. And all the collateral illnesses. One of the things Patrick and I were talking about backstage is the intensity of use by drug addicts and alcoholics of the healthcare system. That they're in the emergency room all the time. They're also imposing costs on our justice system. They're imposing costs on our foster care system. They overutilize every aspect of the government, and you get them into treatment and all that stops. And they stop. Patrick was telling me that he went to 17 rehabs, but he was in the emergency room once a week with everything from kidney infections, contusions on his face from falling. And in 15 years that he's been sober, he's never been to an emergency room. And I see that. We all know that that's what happens to addicts. They're negative producers, and they're just, like I said, in economic terms, they're drags on the whole system. But also, but just for the morale of our country. We are in, what we're facing now in this country is we have the worst health outcomes in the history of the world.
Yes.
We have the highest chronic disease burden of any country in the world. We pay the highest cost, 2 to 3 times what Europeans pay for health care. And we've lost 6 years to Europe in terms of our lifespan over the past 2 decades. We've got the highest infant mortality rate in the developed world, the highest maternal mortality rate in the developed world. And then our cancer rates, we're having an epidemic of colorectal cancer now among children. And 10 to 14-year-old children in the last decade, colorectal cancer has grown by 500%.
Wow.
Well, that is, we have a healthcare crisis, but we also have a mental health crisis. And that's a crisis of loneliness. It's a crisis of despair, of fragmentation, of atomization, of just disconnection from community. And it's being amplified by social media, by cell phones, but also people, when they're disconnected, turn to drugs. They look for something outside of them to fill that lonely hole inside of them. And so, you're seeing record numbers of addictions. Now, the highest cause of death, overdose, is in children in Americans under 45 years old. And we can't fix that by treating the addiction alone. We have to treat the causes of it. We have to work on prevention. We have to intervene early, but we have to figure out ways to reconnect, particularly our children, with community. Addiction is about isolation. It's a disease of isolation. Addicts end up alone. They burn their relationships. They lose their jobs. They end up in rooms or jails or institutions or dead. And the ultimate solution to that is reconnecting people to community. And we have to look at how do we do that. Strategy is about how do we do that. And Patrick talked about outcome directed strategies, and that's what we need to focus on. The fragmentation is occurring in the response too. The response is, there's no coordination between all of the needs and the institutions that could help with this problem, housing and law enforcement and healthcare and mental health care. There's no coordination, and it's a fee-based service system. So people are, just like the medical system, people have an economic incentive to make sure you don't get well. And that's not saying people who work in these, as caregivers don't want you to be well. Of course they do. But the system itself is designed to keep you sick. Every time you relapse, the rehab makes more money. And the costs go up, and the insurance companies, you think the insurance companies are going to lose money every time you go, but they're looking at the entire cost because they collect friction from those costs. And it's like Lloyd's of London, rather have one boat sink a year or 100 boat sinks a year. They'd rather have 100. Because then everybody is buying the insurance and the cost of the pie goes up and they're collecting friction on it. Everybody along the way is making money on fee-based services, and ultimately what we have to do at HHS over the next 3 years is do everything we can to switch the model at CMMI and CMS and HRSA and SAMHSA to coordinate response so that somebody is in charge of that addict. Somebody is accountable as he moves through the system. And to move to outcome-based services where people have an incentive to make sure you don't relapse, that there's a strong economic incentive. You get paid one price for treating that individual, then you follow that individual for 3 years, and you're responsible for all the costs. And that will bring down the cost because then people will look. We have lots of evidence-based treatments. We know what works. We're not doing it well because nobody has an incentive to do that, and so there's no accountability.
And we were talking earlier as well, Secretary, about the disconnect between the sort of mental health and the physical health. And as you've just described, the opportunity to make sure that all of that is incorporated in as people are cared for. So it's not just separated, but how does the mental health affect the physical health? And so that there's actually an integration of services.
Yeah, I mean, we need to integrate services. And that's, you know, the Great American Recovery Act is an effort to begin that
Yes.
Transition.
Yes.
The Streets program, for example, is based partially on the program that was modeled in the Netherlands. We go out, we bring together law enforcement, we bring together mental health, we bring together counselors, we bring together housing, and we intervene early. We try to get to that addict as soon as, or people with mental health problems as soon as possible. We find them on the street. We move them from crisis to detox, to treatment, to housing, to employment, and ultimately to reconnecting to communities, and to self-sufficiency.
Well, as you can imagine, everyone here is very excited about the Great American Recovery Initiative. And so hearing more about it and understanding how you're taking this on and moving it forward is really extraordinarily important and very exciting to all of us who are concerned about these issues. You had talked about the Streets program. Tell us a little more about Streets. And then sober housing, I think, is also a very important part of this that I know you're very committed to as well.
I mean, the Streets program begins with a $100 million program that's going to be distributed to 8 pilot programs, regional pilot programs, where we will coordinate the government. The insurance companies don't have any. The insurance companies have your life with them is very short-lived. You move from one to the other. They're looking at they're looking at the costs over 1 year. And we need to extend that periphery, the periphery of that horizon, so somebody is looking over the costs over 3 years and the entire cost. And right now the fiduciary for addicts is CMS. CMS only is looking at the cost savings to the healthcare system. That's all they're concerned about. And nobody's looking at the broader cost savings. For example, law enforcement. We're bringing all of these agencies together. We're going to do a study that looks at the entire cost of the addict over the lifetime of the addiction, so that we can demonstrate savings over time to justify the cost of this program. The Streets program, as I said, it's a $100 million program. It builds on a $45 million program that we gave this year for sober housing. And I'm working with Scott Turner at HUD to revolutionize sober housing. I'm a really strong believer in sober housing. I think we need to not just treat the addict and then put him back into the environment that was making him sick or contributing, let me put it this way, contributing to his sick illness. We need to give him some stability, or her some stability, and from there they can get employment, they can develop relationships, they can develop independence, and then they can move on. But you need to give them that. Without sober housing, treatment is going to fail.
Yeah. Well, this is a whole new approach, as you're describing, which is also so tremendously important, and the difference between other programs that from the past and sort of where we're going into the future under your leadership. And it really is a very important and exciting part of this. We'd also talked a little bit about integrating some faith-based initiatives within this whole arena to help sort of address these issues. Talk a little bit about your thoughts about that and how that plays a part of this.
Faith-based initiatives work, and that's, they're scientifically proven to work.
Oh.
And they do that by reconnecting us to a community, by expanding the relationships that the addict has. And as I pointed out, addiction is a disease of isolation. You cut off those relationships. And God talks to human beings through many vectors, through each other, through organized religions, through the great books of those religions, through wise people and the prophets, and through nature. but nowhere with such texture and grace and joy as through other human beings. And when we cut off our relationships with other human beings, we lose that access to the divine. And that is a healing power. We are in a spiritual malaise in this country. And we need to give people access to all different ways of reconnecting with something that is higher than themselves. And, you know, I'm reminded of Bill Wilson, who was the founder of the 12-Step movement, had he was in a program before he launched AA, which was called the Oxford Group. And the Oxford Group had 8 steps that are, from which the 12 steps of AA are taken. And those 8 steps were intended to induce a spiritual awakening. And Bill Wilson had that spiritual awakening, and his compulsion to drink, which he'd been fighting for 40 years, suddenly just went away, just miraculously. And he could not imagine that he would ever take a drink again. And then during that 6-month period when he was sober, he put together a deal to buy the primary vendors for the Goodyear and Firestone tire companies. And it would have the deal was going to make him a millionaire and set him up for life. This was the height of the Great Depression, 1932. And he went out to Akron to ink the deal. And somebody else had gone in and stolen the deal from him. And he had put all of his finances in that deal, and he was crushed. He was standing in the lobby of the Mayflower Hotel in Akron, and all of a sudden, all of that compulsion to drink came back to him full force. And he was 20 feet away from the lounge, and he could hear the ice clinking in the glasses, and he could hear the laughter of the patrons, and it was screaming at him to come in and get a drink. And on his way to the lounge, he had the central revelation of the 12-step programs, which is he realized the only way that he was going to stay sober is if he helped another alcoholic. And he went, instead of going into the lounge, he went into a phone booth, and he got the yellow pages, and he looked up preachers, the Salvation Army, sanitariums, and hospitals looking for a hopeless alcoholic that he could talk to. And he eventually found Bob Smith, Dr. Bob Smith, who had tried everything to quit drinking. And he was able to persuade Bob Smith to meet with him. And when Bob Smith came into the meeting, he said, "You got 15 minutes," because he'd heard it all. He'd never heard it from another alcoholic. And they ended up talking all night. And that was the first 12-step meeting. And they both decided the next day the only way they're going to stay sober is to find another alcoholic. So they went to the hospital, and they found a guy who was literally handcuffed to a bed. And he was the third member. And it was that this realization that the only way that the spiritual awakening works, but it's just a daily reprieve. And if it's not renewed every day through service to other people, service to other alcoholics, that you'll lose it. And so the 12-step programs teach you, build that muscle of you've got to do something to serve another human being every day of your life. And that's how you teach people to reintegrate in the community, because they get that spiritual and emotional return from service that they then become addicted to. And they begin building relationships and friendships and a sense of community and stability in their lives. And it gives them a purpose in their lives. And that's how you precipitate a spiritual revitalization, a spiritual renaissance, by reaching out to addicts on the street and then giving them stable lives and teaching them ways to be of service every day.
It's extraordinary. Well, this also is, we have, as a nation, have a crisis around social isolation and loneliness. And I think that adds, as you've just described, to these issues around addiction, et cetera, that are so prevalent. But the opportunity to reach out, as you've described, is extraordinary, and yet so simple to do.
I don't think it's simple. And I get very
simple in terms of making
I
the
get
effort.
very intimidated from talking to Patrick.
Yeah, right.
Like an encyclopedia.
Simple
There's
in
all
that you
these
need to make
ideas
that
about
effort.
how to do it, but they all involve, doing these. It seems like you've got to change, everything the federal government has been doing forever, and
Which I think you're able to do. Yeah.
Oh, we can do that. We have to. There's a tremendous amount of low-hanging fruit.
Yes.
And but I'm hoping that when I leave this job in 3 years, that we will have changed the trajectory and changed public attitudes toward the treatment of addiction, and at least developed a lot of models in the states for outcome-based care and for integrated care, so that we have something to build on.
Yes, yes, and that's happening so much, as you know, in the physical health arena. So paying for value, incorporating all of those aspects.
That's what we're trying to do across
Yes.
CMS, and we have an amazing team. Dr. Oz is really extraordinary, and he's completely committed to this, as everybody is. Marty McCary and Jay Bhattacharya and all the people who work there are committed to that model.
Yes, well, and the outcomes then will be quite different than they are today, where you're just paying for a service.
Yeah, and that's just a death spiral for us.
Death spiral, yeah.
We have to figure out ways to reconnect our children to a national purpose and to communities and to a sense of purpose in their lives.
Yes.
And create bridges to bring people together again across all these atomized landscapes.
Right. One of the challenges I think that we all face as well is the workforce. The opportunity to provide these services depends on a robust workforce. What are things we can do to support developing a better, a more comprehensive workforce? Because right now we have a lot of shortages and problems that really prevent us from doing certain things.
You mean in caregiver for addiction specifically?
Yes.
That's part of the funding that we're putting in, and we're putting in hundreds of billions of dollars.
Right.
And a lot of it, about $500 billion, will go to the states in block grants, and a lot of that is workforce retention, building a workforce. Oh, it's that's one of the things that we've got to make an enormous investment in.
Yes. And I know we've talked about this before, but I know personal stories are so important with respect to these issues because people relate. And I know your personal journey has been so extraordinarily important. Could you talk a little bit more about how that's affected where you're thinking and sort of what direction we're going in as a result of what you've experienced personally? Because I know that has really shaped your approach and your values.
Yeah, I was a heroin addict for 14 years, beginning in my early teens.
Yeah.
And I've been 43 years in recovery. And these, 12-step programs saved my life. It provides all the gravities around which all of my life is oriented: my family, my friendships, the work that I do. I go to meetings every day. I don't have time to go to meetings. I've got 75,000 employees, and I've got a big job, and a lot of people relying on me, and I really don't have time to do it, but I go anyway, no matter what. And when I first came into the program in September of 1983, my first meeting, I asked the guy, "How long do you have to keep coming to these meetings?" He said, "Just keep coming till you like it."
Till you like it?
Yeah, and I've been coming 43 years. I still don't like going to meetings. There's always some place I'd rather be. I'd rather stay in bed with my wife. I go to an early morning meeting. But I go every day because when I go, the rest of my life works. And for me, it's like brushing my teeth. I don't look forward to brushing my teeth. I don't enjoy the sensation. I do it every day because I don't want to live with the consequence of what happens when I don't do it. And I need to maintain that that spiritual center, everything that I've done in my life, that I've done out of personal ambition or aspirations or an acquisitive impulse or materialism, has been wormwood and bile. And everything that I've done that is consequential or enduring has come from that spiritual center. And we're all hybrid beings. We're half spiritual and half biological. And a lot of times our biological being doesn't have the best judgment. And the challenge is, how do you walk with one foot in the spiritual world and one in the biological world? And the answer to that is that you have to be disciplined about keeping yourself spiritually fit. Mm-hmm. And so I make a big effort to do that in my own life, but it also gives me an understanding about what that takes to, for an addict who's out there, who's hopeless, mm-hmm. who's irritated, discontent, who's lost all of their touch with their own humanity.
Yes.
And how do you bring them back into society? And how do you give them a chance to fulfill their God-given potential and give them a sense of purpose in their lives? And, it begins with these little steps of giving them the opportunity to be useful to other human beings.
Right. The other area that you've mentioned oftentimes is the importance of prevention, working to make sure that we can prevent these things from developing into the crisis points and crisis response as well. Any thoughts about?
Yeah, this is just like in physical medicine. The longer you wait, the more expensive and the more insurmountable the job becomes. And when we know the kids who are going to become addicts. It's pretty easy to identify them early in life. They're acting out. They're having contact with the criminal justice system. They're getting thrown out of schools. They're getting in fights. And you see these things happening, and we need to start doing the interventions then, mm-hmm. when there's still neuroplasticity in their brains, before they've internalized the pathology and locked themselves into behaviors that are very, very difficult to break later on. But we can break them early if we identify them early.
Yes.
And that's one of the issues with one of the aspirations of the Streets program, to find people as early as possible. But also, we're taking a number of other steps to make sure, to identify kids in foster care who need help, mm-hmm. and provide them with help before they have encounters with the criminal justice system, with hospitals, with medical care, et cetera.
Right. So as you look ahead, Secretary, thinking about the future, in 5 years in America, what progress do you hope you'll see as a result of this work? How do you see that progress moving forward for our future?
Well, I'm hoping that we've at least by then gotten a series of models around the country in states and cities of things that work, so that we know how to do them. We know how to bring the insurance companies in.
Yes.
We know how to do early intervention. We know how to unify the response across all the different agencies. And we know how to. We've developed ways of following the addict for several years and having somebody take ownership of that addict and say, okay, if I pay you as a rehab, I'm not going to pay you, a daily rate, so that the guy relapses in 2 months and you get paid again. I'm going to pay you one cash disbursement for him for a year, or for 2 years, or 3 years.
Yes, and really manage the care.
Right, and you manage all the care.
Yes.
You're responsible for that individual, so if he shows up on your doorstep again, you're going to lose money.
Right. Right.
And that gives the economic incentive, the financial incentive to that rehab to do everything in their power to make sure that that addict does not return. And when you align the economic incentives with the healthcare outcomes that we're looking for,
Right.
behavior will change. And that is what we need to do. And that misalignment, is pervasive throughout the healthcare system in this country, and it's why we're paying so much for healthcare, because people are not getting paid to make patients well. Everybody in the system, the insurers, the hospitals, the doctors, the pharmaceutical companies, are all making money by keeping us sick. And those economic incentives filter down and they change human behavior. And we're not going to do anything without the easiest way to change behavior is to rationalize the financial incentives.
Right.
Once you do that, everything else is just going to follow naturally. Now, people are going to be incentivized to identify the interventions that actually work.
Yes.
And to implement them. And the companies that don't do that are going to go out of business. And the companies that do are going to stay in business and flourish. All the things that we're chattering about, nothing's going to work unless we realign those incentives. It's absolutely critical that we do that. So we all have our thinking caps on every day about how do we do that? How do we do models for this? How do we rationalize the economic incentives so that they're aligned with good healthcare policy and good health?
Yeah, well, that's, I think everyone in this room, and certainly the work we're doing for Action for Progress under Patrick's leadership is really focusing and aligned with exactly what you're saying. So we are really grateful to you for your leadership and grateful that you're moving forward with all of these initiatives that we can work with you on and be supportive of and really transform the mental health addiction care that we provide in this country. It really is an exciting opportunity.
Thank you very much, Tom.
We're about out of time. I just want to say one personal thing at the end. The Secretary and I have known each other for, I don't know, most of our lives, actually, since we were kids.
At least 50 years.
At least 50 years. When I was talking about doing this, my colleagues said two things. Don't call him Bobby, and don't start talking about Hickory Hill and Hyannisport stories. So we stayed away from all of that. But what we didn't talk about and we touched on was, I think, the thing that I find most inspiring by this whole discussion, Secretary, is one, your passion and commitment to transforming the system and providing that leadership. But also, if you think about those who are suffering today, right now, struggling the way that you did in the past, and looking at sort of that time to where you are today as the Secretary of Health, influencing the health of millions of Americans, the inspiration and hope that that provides is beyond description. So thank you for all you're doing, and we look forward to working with you into the future to achieve these extraordinarily important goals that you've aligned.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank all of you.
Let's give the Secretary a round of applause. You're the best. Give me a hug, man. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Well, that was really an inspiring conversation, important for all of us to think about the future, where we're going, and how we need to get there together in our Action for Progress. So I'm also now pleased to bring on stage CMS Administrator Dr. Mehmet Oz and Dr. John Sharon, Professor of Psychiatry at UCLA and USC, and the former Director of the LA County Department of Mental Health. So with that, welcome to the stage, and I'm going to turn it over to you guys. Thank you, John. Thank you, Dr. Oz. Thank you.
Hello, sir. Great to be here. I came from LA, 75, 80 degrees, 5-foot surf. But for you, I would do that. Really, really great to see the new commitments coming from the administration, particularly around addictions, the inclusion of spirituality and other non-kind of clinical elements, as well as a focus on AOT, a very important program. I ran mental health, as you just heard, for LA County, which is the largest mental health system locally in the country. And what I'll say is that I had great bosses, I had a great team, great community, wonderful clients, but the needs and the bureaucracy itself were overwhelming. It was a very process-oriented experience. And I know from listening to you and knowing you a little bit that this is one of the things that really you want to transform to liberate the front lines of our country to care for those people in need.
We use the word liberate. I think it's the right way to think about it. We can unlock tremendous potential. And we can do it in a couple ways. The secretary who you were blessed to spend some time with is a remarkable leader who has put MAHA on the agenda, not just in political campaigns, but intrinsically it's what we think about now at Health Human Services. And the reason that's important is if you define MAHA the way I do, which is making it easier for Americans to be healthy, I think that's reflective of what so much of the Secretary spoke to you about and has been espousing, then you recognize that those are realities that need to be addressed so that everyone feels they can be on the playing field of life. A lot of moms are telling us that they feel it is harder for them to raise their children healthy than it was for their mothers to raise them. But that's probably chronically the case. Everyone always thinks it was easier for the prior generation and their parents had it easy. But demonstrably, objectively, there are challenges to raising healthy people today that we have to get our arms around. And that has much more to do with us taking brave action on some controversial topics, which have sometimes moneyed interests that oppose them. And it takes a brave person, so I applaud the Secretary for that. He's been a great leader, and I know that's going to take place. It may take a while, but that's definitely going to take place. But then within the system of how we pay for healthcare in America, we have remarkable levers that we do not use as effectively as we could. And I went to business school when I was in medical school. I didn't go there to invest my portfolio. I went there for one reason. I knew money drove decisions in medicine. I was curious how it did it. And the graduate course is what I'm in now. It's the best job I've ever had, by the way. It's not just because of secretary, but it's remarkably talented people come into government, at least in this administration, and they're not coming there to watch stuff. They don't want to keep the trains running on time. They want to actually fix the problems that many of you appreciate. That's why you're here today. And so the structural abnormalities that hinder our ability to drive value into the healthcare system have been hindered. But let me come back to this word liberate that you used, because it may be the most important point that we'll both talk about. If we want to unlock the value of Americans, we have to keep them healthy. But what does that translate to in money? You're all aware of the national debt and how every year we're losing trillions more and the interest rates more than the defense budget, all that stuff. But let me just put a number that's a bit more helpful, make you optimistic. The average American retires at age 61. Obviously, Medicare doesn't even hit you until 65. So they're retiring before they're getting their Medicare benefits, before Social Security fully kicks in. If we could get the average American, because they feel healthy, they're vital, they're strong, they have agency over their future, to start working a year earlier, right out of high school, or work a year later, not retire, or work better during their lifetime because they're healthy, it would generate about $3 trillion. $3 trillion to the U.S. economy. That would more than remove the debt. It would provide us unbelievable strength because the taxes on that $3 trillion would allow us to keep Medicare Part A solvent, to make a trust fund. It would allow us to make Social Security healthier, tremendous downstream benefits. But to do that, you actually have to invest in making sure people want to work the extra year. And a major reason people don't take the steps that make objective sense for them or want to leave their jobs early are mental health issues, the purpose of this conference. And we have all kinds of laws and rules that treat mental health conditions like they're chronic illnesses, that makes them eligible for a payment and the like. But what we're going to talk about today goes beyond that. Why is it that it's so hard to deal with mental health challenges in America?
Yeah, these are great points. And I mean, one of the things that I've always led with is the importance of purpose. And we have a population with folks, as you're saying, who have an opportunity and capacity to deliver more work. And why are we not leveraging that? And why are we not leveraging that in the health and human service space? And I would even say particularly the behavioral health space. As Secretary Kennedy always points out, sponsors mentors, coaches in the military community, battle buddies, are a critical component, not just to navigate, but to provide kinship and help people with their day-to-day lives. And that's not something that we in the healthcare system, and I say this as a clinician, really give enough attention. The solutions are not all clinical. The non-clinical arena is very, very important, and we ought to be looking for that as an employment initiative as well.
Well, I have 20 years ago, with my wife, started a foundation that does peer-to-peer mentoring in high schools around the country. We touch the lives of about 200,000 kids a year. It's grown dramatically. We put about $100 million into this project. It works. We have objective data. We need more of those kinds of experiments. At CMS, we're looking at models. So CMS is Medicare, folks over 65, Medicaid, people who, as Hubert Humphrey has said, are at the dawn of their life, children. 53% of kids are on Medicaid. At the twilight of their life, older folks who don't have money, they go on Medicaid frequently, and then those living in the shadows. So those are the classic categories that are in Medicaid. And all great people take care of their most vulnerable. We're a great nation. We're going to do it as well. That's the ultimate safety net of the country. So we have those two big issues. But the way we innovate often is around these models that we create to get people to come play with us in our sandbox and come up with better concepts. And we have ones that are dedicated to mental health services. We, for example, go into institutions, to places where people are institutionalized, and provide them primary care services. We spend time trying to get folks who have dementia, for example, that are tied into the system. We have all kinds of models we're working on, including a MAHA model that will allow multiple folks to be able to get access to support to just figure out what works and what doesn't work. Some of this is not medical. We shouldn't medicalize everything. The value of having some spiritual belief in your life probably is real and significant and hard to replace that. Loneliness is a massive problem. The last Surgeon General's report, he quantitated it as equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, which I think that's pretty accurate. The impact of substance use, which is often what you turn to if you can't get other connection in your life, and is worsened dramatically by loneliness. These are, if you count lost work days and the like, we're talking about $100 billion a day, including incarceration, maybe $150 billion, not a day, a year. So these are major costs that we're absorbing because we're not taking a crisis, an emotional crisis, on head first. And I point out the fact it's going to have to be multifaceted. You can't just throw money at these issues. Well, we see what's happening in California, Minnesota, and other states when you just throw money at a problem. It's not that the problem's not there. Is that throwing money at it allows it to be diluted in its impact, but also taken by people who do the wrong things with it.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Obviously, waste, fraud, and abuse are big challenges, and so is the paying for service model, where we check off a box because it was process delivered in a compliant way, and that may or not impact the outcome of a human being. You brought up a couple of really important things. One of them is kind of this idea of medicalizing our population. And much like diabetes type 1 and type 2, there's a big fundamental difference in terms of the biology. And the type 2 diabetes really requires a lot of lifestyle attention in particular. But we don't really think about that so much in the mental health and addictions arena. And what I would say is, when you do that, when you're focusing on diagnosing someone and getting them a treatment plan and delivering clinical care, when there are other options, you're actually not just disserving them, because that can have its liabilities, but also you're stealing the really critical clinical resources from the people that I've cared for my whole life, in the VA, in the county, in the government systems, who are the people who are revolving in and out of hospitals, on and off the streets, and in and out of the jails. So I think, in alignment with your vision and the Secretary's vision, figuring out ways to go after people suffering from the human condition with human condition solutions and not clinicalizing them are imperative.
Without question. And I also believe that we have created in our culture an expectation that they're, relatively speaking, quick fixes. They come in the form of small pills or injections. They do tend to be expensive. And there's lots of marketing around these concepts. And I want to be respectful of the fact that there are incredible advances that have been made in our ability to treat cancers and autoimmune problems, in mental health issues as well. But most of these mental health issues are not from a deficiency of some chemical. There's a broader a problem that is existential for a lot of folks, and a holistic approach will work better. But falling asleep is hard to do because you don't actually fall asleep, right? You glide into sleep with a ton of effort. And those of you, how many good sleepers are out there? Put your hands up. There are a couple of them there, right? My wife is a world-class sleeper. I just watch this. She'll take 9 hours and awakes rested and fresh. But that is our growth hormone is generated by our sleep. Our ability to learn is improved dramatically. Kids who are under chronic stress, their amygdalas don't get the appropriate nourishment, so they don't learn well, which is why kids in these environments, again, we're in schools around the country, it's hard for them to learn, and for that reason, they get held back in other ways. So I don't want to turn to medicine to provide all the solutions, but we can provide guide rails. And I do think there are places where we should give credence to treatments that historically have been marginalized. I'll give you a good example. We have 2 large clinical trials now on dementia, showing that there's either, well, let's just be conservative, there's a slowing down or stopping of the symptoms of dementia. We have tests now that are available, like a test called p-tau217, blood test, you could all get it, that will predict fairly accurately, we believe, that within 10 years you're going to have dementia. A lot of mental health conditions start because you stop having, your complexity management starts falling away. That's probably a better way of thinking about it, I think. Complexity management is something we should sort of enjoy, and you're multifaceted. You got to get the kids to school, get folks at work set up. That's all, But when you stop being able to do that because you're having cognitive impairment or other issues are going on in your life, you start to get depressed and down. And so it turns out that these clinical trials have resulted in fairly attractive findings. If you have lifestyle approaches that are effective enough that you might want to know if you're at risk, you'll take the test. Otherwise, why would I give you the test? To tell you that in 10 years you're really in trouble, right? Most people are not going to welcome that test, understandably. So we need to allow some of these ideas that our mothers probably could have told us about to be part of the healthcare system, and do it in a way that makes financial sense because they're based on outcomes. You mentioned this earlier, so I like this. Most of the healthcare system is based on the number of widgets you build. How many procedures do you do? How many patients do you see? It's like a shoemaker. How many soles you hammering into the bottom of the customer's shoes? Every shoe you hammer, you get paid more, so you want to do as many as you can. If the work's not so great, doesn't last that long, you still get paid, so there's a lot of incentives just to do more. And what's not appreciated often is if folks who are not noble in their pursuit of the healing art of medicine are allowed to game that system, they make a ton of money. And what do they do with that money? They push the other people out of the business. So they begin to take over like pariahs, a piranha is a better example with goldfish, just eating all the good guys, pushing them out of the way, and they take over the ecosystem. So it is our job to support those efforts. When good people watch bad people get away with stuff, it's our fault. It's the fault of good people who didn't do much about that. And I've been forced already in my 1-year tenure at CMS to take some pretty draconian actions in areas where we probably could have been more surgical if we just intervened earlier. But by the time I got here, so far gone that you sort of have to burn the whole town down because you don't know who's good anymore. And everyone's going to run away, and hopefully the good people will come back and set up shops and rebuild the place. But you don't want to have to do that. And we risk that in mental health care systems if we're not able to appropriately adjudicate what works, support it, but base reimbursement on value. You get someone healthy again who's got a mental health condition, that's unbelievable value to the economy and to the ecosystem and to our morality. So we ought to do that.
Yeah, amen to that. And I think you're right. Investing in the outcomes that we want and that we agree upon is the critical move because we don't know what we're getting right now. And if we're just checking boxes around a compliant process, we're completely missing the ball. And I think the innovation at the ground level for the people who do the work, and I say this as someone that did street psychiatry in Skid Row, what we need for those people is not necessarily on the recipe from CMS. One of the things that we haven't had a chance to talk about, because we're running out of time, if you want to make a quick couple of statements, is rural health and the issue of mental health and addiction challenges in our rural system, which is, in our rural communities who are, so hard to kind of provide access.
60 million Americans live in rural parts of this country. We have a way of defining that that's pretty objective. Their life expectancy is about 9 years shorter than those in more urban parts of the country. It's massively different. And mental health care issues drive a lot of that. We do not have enough practitioners for mental health support in these areas. The Rural Health Transformation Fund is a 50% increased investment over what we currently spend for Medicaid in these rural healthcare systems. It's the largest investment of its kind ever made. And all the states, 50 states, were given a chance to compete for this money. They all got some of it. And a large number of these applications included mental health support systems. But I'm telling you right now, there's no question about it, whether you want it or not, the best way to help some of these communities is going to be AI-based avatars. Agentic AI taking the ability to do the intake, just catch the patient, customize to what their needs are, understand what they're up to. If you go, and please go play with these tools, they're unbelievable. They'll pick up subtle little nuances in how you're saying things. If you do it on purpose, it's actually sort of cool to find out. That will alert the avatar, but more importantly, the doctor they're going to report to, that there's something going on. So when the clinician connects with you, and there will always be a doctor, 50% of our cortex is designed to read the face of the person in front of you. I can look at you and tell you're bored, happy, excited, running away, whatever. But before you say a thing, and we're hardwired to read each other for that reason. We're social entities by definition. We got to where we are because we're social entities. So the key question is, how do we use AI thoughtfully in that setting? And if we do it right, we'll build a much more sustainable healthcare system around mental health issues. God bless you.
Yeah, God bless you. Well, we're getting the red flash.
I see it. There's a break for commercial. That's what that means.
Well, you know, thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Well, again, thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Oz, for being here with us and your commitment to mental health, behavioral health, and addiction. I also wanted to acknowledge Dr. Oz recently, as he was talking about fraud and abuse, recently visited a program of ours that we work with in Las Vegas to look and assess at the issues around fraud and abuse in hospice care, which is really distressing, and then went to California and did the same thing. So he's really on the move to address those issues, which we're very, very grateful. We're about to do some chair moving here, and then we're going to welcome our next panel, and get out of your way there. Our next panel is called, named Patient-Centric Behavioral Health, Integration of Prevention and Chronic Disease. And our moderator is Deborah Witchey, the CEO of the Association for Behavioral Health and Wellness. And our panelists will be listed on the screen here, which they already are, with their titles and positions. So as soon as the chairs are up, here, come on up. It's a big panel.